So I'm always grateful for our time in the Zen Den because, frankly, I feel like we all need a little time in a Zen Den, even if it's just a Zen Den in the kingdom of our minds. And my favorite part about us gathering, it's funny because, it's whatever's going on out in the world is fluctuating. We're fluctuating with the energy around us and within us. And I feel like, our Zen Den is this perfect opportunity to have a safe space where, we feel like we can just breathe together, be in a space where we are emotionally connected, and in a space where we feel like even though we are individually just on our own in our own space, that at the very least that we recognize the emotional space that each of us hold at different times in our lives. And then we're able to come together in this space and realize, well, maybe we're feeling emotions at different times. We're in a different space, different times. But, we're all deeply connected, just fundamentally by our emotional space, our dreams, our visions, the things that we all inherently want for each other. And I always like to think that at the very least, we are able to create, a safe space in the kingdom of our minds. And that regardless of what's going on out in the world, it's nice to know that we have this sacred, safe space in here. So with that in mind, we'll start actually with our alternate nostril breathing, because I feel like that's one of the really good ways to help to balance out our vibration, to settle our energy a little bit, and just give us this kind of space where we're able to feel that the breath is a tool. And the alternate nostril breathing is complicated enough that it feels like an exercise, but simple enough that you can do it anytime, in any space, under any circumstance. So it's like the hang 10 sign, the thumb and the pinky finger, but then you're going to use your ring finger just to make life a little easier. So the ring finger you put over your left nostril, the thumb over the right nostril. So it is what it sounds like, alternate nostril breathing. So when it feels good, find yourself in a safe space where you're seated comfortably, sitting up straight. And we'll start just by closing off both nostrils, feeling what that feels like. And then when it feels good, keeping the left nostril closed, letting the thumb lift, inhale through the right nostril. We'll hold for a moment. Exhale through the left nostril. Inhale through the left. Hold for a moment. Exhale through the right. Hold empty. Inhale through the right. Hold full. Exhale through the left. Hold empty. Inhale through the left. Hold full. Exhale through the right. Hold empty. Inhale through the right. Hold full. Exhale through the left. Hold empty. Inhale through the left. Hold full. Exhale through the right. Hold empty. Inhale through the right. Hold full. And exhale through the left. And with the eyes closed, let the hands drop down. And just notice the gentle rhythm and energy of the breath. Just notice how the inhale moves a little this energy in space. And just notice that in this breath, there's an opportunity to just feel the energy within us and around us. To feel the space of the breath, the awareness of this moment. And just allowing the energy of this breath, that calm space of this breath, to give you a sense of awareness of the power we have in each breath. And just notice how quickly the energy can change within us and around us. When it feels good, open the eyes and just feeling yourself aware of how easily the breath can change our emotional space, the way we feel, our state of being. So this Zen Den has evolved over the past few weeks. The first week, we just jumped right into the Zen Den and we explored our outer space, our inner space, thought about what resources we might have to offer to the world so that we're tapping into our gifts to share it and using that to bridge the gap that we might feel if we feel isolated or disconnected from the people outside of us. And we use that then for week 2 to form connection, to just be very clear that we're never alone, that we're always deeply connected, even if we are physically isolated, and that we each have experiences through our life lessons, awareness, perspective of the world that can benefit somebody else. So it's tapping into the things that we've learned, the perspective that we've gained, and using our awareness and understanding to help someone else. Week 3, we use this idea of creating a harmony, a global calm, and using the synchronicity of experiences, the divine timing of our meetings and interactions to start showing up in the lives of the people we touch so that we show up in a way that's significant and in a way that, helps to improve our relationships, with ourselves and with everyone else. Then week 4 was creating thoughtful patterns, mindful patterns of thought that we can repeat over and over again to create the energy that we want in our lives, in our relationships, in our mind. And then week 5, we started to talk about belief systems and how fundamentally our belief system is determining how we feel, how we approach relationships, how we show up with strangers, the people that we love and know very well, how we can shift our belief system to then alter the quality of our experiences and improve them. And I encouraged you last week to brag to yourself about yourself, to find the things that you're exceptional at, the gifts you have, the value you bring to the world, to acknowledge it, to celebrate it, and to share it. So I thought week 6, this week, would be a perfect step from the belief system to start to break down the origin of our thoughts and beliefs. We talked a little bit last week about why we believe what we believe, but now I'd like us to think about tracing the origin of what we believe so that we can start to restructure our approach so that we're able to shift our belief system, our assumptions, our preconceived notions, to start to change the way we define circumstances in our relationships. Because I truly believe that you think it, you speak it, you become it. So we think about, well, why do we think what we think? Why do we believe what we believe? And I started to journal about, thinking about the origin of our assumptions. Where do they start? And realizing that assumptions have never told me something that I actually wanted to know. And think about that for a moment. Like the assumptions that we create in our minds, the preconceived notions that we have, it's very rarely something that we actually want to know. Like we'd be better off just jumping in and experiencing whatever the circumstance is rather than having an assumption or a notion of what it might be before we even get there. I always talk in class a lot about how expectations rob us of the experience. That if we walk into a circumstance with an expectation of how we think it should be or what we think it should be, then we spend all of our time comparing the actual experience to what the expectation was. And that it always seems such a shame to go into a circumstance or an experience with a preconceived notion, because we have this idea about people that we've met, places we've never visited before, events that have never happened. And so I want us to start thinking about the origin of our assumptions. Where do these assumptions even come from? And I don't know if you know the old cliche. It's like you know what they say when we assume, and what happens to people who assume that we make an ass out of you and me, that we go into it with this idea of what something should be. And in the process of actually being in the moment, we're in this constant state of comparison between the expectation and the assumption and what actually is happening. So I feel like, well, what better place to dive into our assumptions than in this safe space of the Zen Den, and just start thinking about where our assumptions come from. Why do we depend so much on assumptions and preconceived notions? And it's almost as if we depend on them for our happiness. Like we have this awareness and understanding that if we walk into something with an assumption, that somehow it makes the experience more comfortable. And I think it's actually the opposite, that the experiences and assumptions, leave us with this state of being that we almost block ourselves from part of the experience. So our little reality check this week is to give ourselves a visualization experience that starts to make us consider whether assumptions are working with us or against us. So I'll ask you to close your eyes, open your mind, find yourself in a comfortable space. And with your eyes closed and your mind open, think about all of the vacation spots in the world. And then think of one place that you've always wanted to go, but you've never been. A place you fantasized about going to visit. And I'll ask you to visualize that place. Visualize one place that you've always wanted to go, but never been to. Focus on the details of this place. What does it look like? What does it feel like while you're there? Thinking about one place you've always wanted to go, but you haven't been there yet. So now I'll ask you, why did you want to go there in the first place? How did you first hear about this place? Was it a first-hand account from somebody who's been? Did you see a picture of this place? Did you read a review or receive a recommendation? What did you hear about this place that you've never been, but always wanted to go? And then consider how your first introduction to that place contributed to your anticipation or excitement about going. Because you've never been there. So how do you know that you want to go? How do you know it's someplace that you would enjoy spending time in? What one thing about that place is drawing you to it? Is it the scenery? Maybe it's the environment, the excursions, something you'd see. Maybe it's one of those bucket list items, a place you've, always heard about. Maybe it has a mystical or spiritual essence about it. Or maybe it's just a pretty place. But how do you really know you want to go if you've never been? What's that driving force inside that would make you plan a trip to go somewhere you've never been before? And then how do you think your preconceived idea about the place will affect you once you actually visit? So if it's a place where maybe a friend has visited before and they've told you all the most amazing things about the place, and then you show up and you're comparing your experience to the account and review of your friend. And wouldn't that somehow change the quality of your experience? What makes you believe the things you believe What makes you assume the things you assume? What's contributing to your preconceived notion? It's easy to think about the vacation spot and, a place that you've heard about and fantasized about, dreamt about in your mind. But still, when you show up there, you're going to create your own experience. And often, presumptions that we have about what the experience will be, well, they tend to deplete our connection with the experience itself. So now that you've thought about one place you've always wanted to go, think about one place that you never want to go, that you've never been to, but you've heard horrible things about. Maybe the people aren't nice, the food is awful, maybe it's dirty, or worse, a dangerous place. One place you've never ever been, but you never want to go. And think about why you don't want to go. Maybe you have heard horrible things. Maybe it's a firsthand account. Maybe, somebody went, came back and said, oh, don't bother, it's not worth the trip. It's like having somebody almost discourage you from exploring the place. Now, certainly, there are redeemable qualities about every place, every person. I don't care where it is. There's always going to be something that you experience there that's going to contribute to the breadth of your knowledge, your perspective of the world. But what if that person's account of the place, that person's review, prevented you from ever going at all? I mean, what if your preconceived notions about that place has blocked you from an experience that might positively influence your life? What if your soulmate is in that place, and just because somebody gave it a bad review, you never wound up actually going? If you think about all the times in our lives where one thought, one idea, one, turn and change in direction has changed the course and direction of our lives. That one time where you made a wrong turn and wound up running into somebody who you haven't seen in a long time, or somebody who has been in your life since then. And just think about how our preconceived notions and assumptions are dictating where we go or how open we are to the experiences that are waiting for us in life. The difference between having one place that you've always wanted to go and never been, and a place that you've never been and decided that you never want to go. And just think about how that shift in perspective changes how open you are to the experience. Let's think about even just on something closer to home. Think about our body image, that we all have an idea of, how we want our body to look or how we want to present ourselves to the world. But realize that changes over time. How you present yourself today is probably very different than maybe it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Certainly trends and styles change. So I'll suggest that the style that you chose as a child or a teenager or a young adult, would you make the same choices now? If you had spiked purple hair as a teenager, would you choose that as your style choice now? Well, why or why not? Because the perspective of the world has changed for us. And our body image changes drastically. I mean, our body now is not the same physical body it was 10, 20 years ago. And maybe even how we perceive who we are right now or how we project who we might be in the future. How does that change with how we feel when we look at the mirror? If we think we should look like someone else, well, how does that impact the way we feel about ourselves right now? We could look at a person with a muscle-bound, physically fit physique, what we perceive to be physically fit, and maybe they look like that epitome of health and wellness on the outside. But then if you talk to them and they're constantly counting calories and, on a treadmill for 5 hours a day and constantly comparing their size today than yesterday and looking at the numbers on the scale and letting that define how they feel, well, how fit really are they mentally and physically? And we know a physically rigorous workout can test our physical strength and endurance, but I would think that the true test of health and wellness is measured by our emotional state, how we feel in this physical space. And what's the use of being in perfect physical shape, but having low self esteem or criticizing or comparing our body to everyone else's? If on the outside it looks pretty, but on the inside we're in a constant state of judgment and criticism, well, that's debilitating. Think about people who are independently wealthy. The people who are born into wealth, notoriously have issues with self-worth and their own value. And they often, are feeling this place where they're internally conflicted about who they are and their role in the world, that life looks really easy with material comforts when they're easily accessible. But often the life lessons come from the challenges in making ourselves comfortable in the most uncomfortable physical circumstances. So we think about, how we perceive things and how they really are. You look at somebody who seems very successful, physically fit, independently wealthy, and you find out that they're battling deep depression, isolation. So I'll suggest that we should really stand up and challenge our assumptions, challenge our preconceived notions, challenge the way we walk into a circumstance and the assumptions we hold while we're there. Maybe the assumptions that we place on what role we should play as a parent, spouse, lover, friend, our assumptions about our roles in the world dictate how we show up in the world. So I'd like us to play with that a little bit for the next 30 minutes or so. So we'll start with our 4-4-4 breath exercise, just to get us in a space so that for the next visualization exercise, we're able to focus a little bit more. So for the next breathing exercise, just find a comfortable space, close the eyes, open the mind, find a space where you feel stable, secure, and safe. And when you're ready, close your eyes. So the 4-4-4 breath is 4 inhales. We hold for 4. We exhale for 4 counts, and we'll repeat it 4 times. So you'll start to notice the natural rhythm of your breath, whether it's slow and sharp or long, deep, slow breaths. And as you notice the natural rhythm, I'm going to ask you to focus on the inhale and make it as long as you can. Invite in a really long and deep inhale. And then just allow the exhale to happen naturally. And notice that when you focus on the breath, you become immediately more present, just more aware to the sensations in the body, the physical space around you, within you. So with your eyes closed and your mind open, I'll start the countdown. 4-4-4 breaths. So we'll start on the inhale for the count of 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold empty. 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold empty. 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold empty. 4, 3, 2, 1. And just allow yourself in this space to notice, to feel, just being aware that a shift in the rhythm of the breath can change the energy and how you feel, the emotional space. So I want to walk you through a visualization that kind of takes us from the external to the internal. Well, it's part of a visualization we did the first week. That's going to be a little different this time because we're going to allow it to bring us back into this space where we're able to objectively observe our assumptions. So with the eyes closed, you're going to allow yourself to create a vision of you walking to your car. You're walking to your car with the intention of driving your normal route home. The familiar route, so there's not a lot to think about along the way. You're just going to spend the time and observe. You get in your car. You start to back out of the parking space. You just look around as you're putting the car in drive and leaving the parking lot. You pull onto the familiar street. You look around at the scenery. Notice the color of the sky. If there are any clouds. Notice the trees, the leaves, any flowers. Notice any buildings or landmarks that are familiar. And just notice the scenery around you. Driving along the familiar road, all the familiar sights you're used to seeing. And you pull up to the first red light. As you're sitting at the red light, spend time looking around, maybe noticing the cars around you. Try to notice the subtleties, the details. Maybe even roll down your window. Get a closer, clearer view. Maybe notice the sounds, the city around you. Are there any birds chirping? Can you hear the wind blowing? Maybe all you notice are the cars racing by. Try to be aware of the details that you can focus on in your mind. The awareness, what's happening around you, by looking within you. When you're waiting for the light to change from red to green, you look in your rearview mirror. You notice there's a group of cyclists coming up behind you. You notice it's a rather large group of cyclists. And as they get closer, you notice that every single person on the bicycle is naked. A group of naked cyclists in broad daylight. Now you're just sitting in your car and you notice this group of cyclists and you've noticed the look on their faces, this air of freedom as they ride naked in broad daylight. What assumptions do you have about the people on the bicycle? It's an entire group of cyclists. There must be hundreds of them on their bicycles. What assumptions do you have about them? Well, if they're naked in broad daylight on their bicycles, certainly they must be very body confident. They're riding naked in the middle of the day, and they look happy doing it. So they're free. What assumptions do you make about the people riding on their bicycles, naked in broad daylight? Certainly, they must be self confident. Maybe they believe that they're pretty, that they're competent to be able to have the confidence to ride naked on their bicycle during the day. What about their home life? Do you think they're that confident in their relationships, in their job? I mean, it takes a lot of confidence to show up naked in broad daylight and ride their bicycle. Maybe there's a part of you that wishes you had that confidence. And maybe you already do. Then I'll ask you to put yourself in the position of the naked cyclists. Imagine yourself on a bicycle naked in broad daylight with 100 other cyclists riding with you. How would you perceive the person in the car looking at you? Now that you're the person on the bicycle, what assumptions might you have about the driver of the car sitting at the red light who's just gawking out their window at the group of cyclists riding by? Maybe you might think that they're too insecure to ride their bicycle naked in broad daylight. Maybe you start to wonder about what their home life is like. If you're the person riding free, naked on your bicycle in the middle of broad daylight, well, maybe that person driving in the car is more concerned about the list of tasks they have to accomplish than they are about living. Maybe they're so busy running from place to place, doing thing to thing, that they don't take the time to explore the freedom, the feeling to ride naked, confidently, in broad daylight. What assumptions might the person on the bicycle have about the person driving the car? What difference might they feel? Feeling judged or insecure versus just feeling confident and prepared, capable, able. Realizing how easy it is for us to shift from stepping into the role of the perspective of the person in the car versus the person on the bicycle. It's like shifting our perspective from being the person on the outside to being the person on the inside. And what do we need to assume in order to give ourselves the ability to show up in our lives in the way that we want to? What do we assume we need in order to create what we want? What do we assume about the people around us who are already successful, according to our perception of success? What do we assume about our ability and ourselves? Do we think we're able, capable, prepared, and ready? Or is there a seed of doubt? Do we believe in our ability to show up? Or do we think there's something that's still left to learn before we're prepared enough to really step into the role to live our lives? Just consider how we assess situations. We make assumptions. We automatically start to analyze. And whatever we focus on, we're forming an opinion. That opinion is often determining how we show up. So that there's a constant commentary going on in our minds. If we listen to it, if we focus on it too much, well, that commentary can determine how we actually show up in the world. Are we critiquing ourselves, criticizing, or are we complimenting? Are we in a space where we're just open to the experience, or do we show up with a preconceived notion of what we think the experience will be? And how might we approach improving the quality of our commentary that we have about ourselves? Maybe simply finding a redeeming quality about ourselves and others. Because certainly when we look hard enough, we can always find a redeeming quality about anyone, even those who are unaware that they have a redeeming quality about themselves. So how can we start to improve our awareness of our power, our purpose, our preconceived notions, and the impact that they have on how we show up in the world? We talked last week about creating thoughtful patterns of thought, mindful habits, so that the way we think, how we show up in the world, we start to create a pattern of thought, a belief system that works for us. So what do we need to believe about ourselves, to assume about ourselves, in order to show up in the world in the way that we want to show up? We all have an idea of how we want to be perceived. We have an idea of how we want to present ourselves to the world and how we want to be received as a result of that presentation. We know the difference between showing up with a smile and showing up in anger or frustration, and how we're received by the people around us. So maybe assigning an emotional energy to our preconceived notions and our assumptions. Thinking more of how do we want to feel when we walk out in the world? Well, think back to body image. How do we want to feel about how we look? How do we want to feel about our actions? How do we want to feel about our memories? As we reflect on the past, thinking about the moments we've already lived, what assumptions might we have made about others and their intentions? And what assumptions might we feel aren't useful, helpful? So that instead of allowing preconceived notions and assumptions to rob us of an experience, they're actually contributing to it. Think about assumptions we have about the present, about the things around us, within us, about the tools we have at our disposal, about the options we have, assumptions we might have about the future, about our dreams and our desires. How accessible do we think they are? So I suggest that in each breath, we have the opportunity to create an emotional experience for ourselves. And frankly, whatever we choose to focus on, we're always right. So maybe we just need to explore, to find what's going to work for us. But then we have to determine how we're going to feel about exploring. The unknown is notoriously a space of fear for people. People fear change because they're not sure about what's going to happen next. Well, the only thing we really are certain about is what's happening right now. So let's go into our candle meditation and allow our candle to help us be very present about what's happening right now. So you should have your candle somewhere close by. Maybe you have it in something, or maybe it's on something. So wherever your candle is, go ahead and grab onto it. And I always like to start off the candle meditation just by, taking a moment to be very present. Present, looking at the physical attributes of the candle. Maybe looking at whatever the candle is being held in, whether it's glass or wax. Just take a moment to look at the physical attributes of the candle. Or you just look down at the flame and notice it dancing in the wick. And just aware that, you've made a conscious effort to light the candle. You're aware of the power of the candle, the fire inside, and just start thinking about what preconceived notions you might have about the candle itself. Now, we all know a little bit about the properties of fire. We know that the heat can burn us, the warmth can make us feel comforted and secure. But how do we know that difference between the hot and cold? So feel free to place the candle somewhere that's close to you. If it feels comfortable to hold it, feel free to do that. And then I'll ask you to put your hand over the top of the candle so that you can feel the heat of the flame. Now, intuitively and intelligently, we know that if we put our hand too close to the flame, well, we are likely to feel that heat. Maybe it's a little too much and we burn ourselves. If we bring our hand far away from the flame, well, we might not feel anything at all, and we might not even know that the candle is lit. So depending on the distance of our hand to the flame, well, it depends on how much of the heat we feel. If we bring our hand too close to the flame, well, certainly we might burn, but then also we might extinguish the flame and get too close to it. So we cut off the oxygen supply and the flame no longer burns. So we know to keep a safe distance, not just to protect our hand, but also to protect the flame. So we find that sweet spot. Find where that sweet spot is for you. We know what will happen if we touch it. We know that if we get too close, too hot, too far, too cold. Kind of reminds me of the Goldilocks story with the porridge, whether it's too hot, too cold, or just right. Well, how do you know it's too hot, too cold, or just right until you've explored a little? And frankly, wouldn't it serve us to have an assumption about what's too close, too far? Because we don't really know until we get there and start playing around with the distance a little bit. Well, maybe that's what's happening with most things in life, that we're kind of navigating around, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and that we don't really know how to navigate the path ahead until we've made a couple wrong turns or felt stuck or bumped into an obstacle or two along the way and had to take a detour. That we don't know that we've walked in the wrong direction until we realize we're moving away from where we wanted to go. So there's a perspective from which we look at our life and we look at the world. It takes an awareness of the surroundings to navigate the path ahead and to know our direction and destination. It's like being in a forest full of trees or in one of those mazes made out of all those bushes. Every direction can look the same. But without a reference frame for where we want to go and how to get there, we might find that the assumptions make us feel more comfortable. Maybe that's why we hold on to them so closely, is that the assumptions make us feel like we aren't in uncharted territory, that we're not in the space of the unknown, that we kind of have an idea about what might be there, what might be to come, what might be waiting for us around the corner. But then at the same time, that reference frame might prevent us from actually paying attention to all the details in the space and following our instinct and intuition to navigate the proper path ahead. So feeling that heat from the flame, being aware of how much we have to explore to have an understanding of what's actually working for us and what isn't, maybe we should just lighten up a little bit, be a little more gentle on ourselves and let go of that need to assign a feeling and emotion to what might happen or will happen or could happen, and instead just be open to what is happening. So let's start our visualization focus on the candle. And now that you've gotten an awareness of where the heat is, where the energy of the candle is, start to focus on the light, the flame. And just take a few moments to stare at the flame. And allowing that focus on the flame to immediately put you into a present moment space. That there's no worry about where to go or where we've been. We're not concerned about what will happen in the next moment. We're aware and focused on what we're creating in this. Notice the dimensions of the flame. Notice the colors. Notice if it moves because of your breath or the effect of the air around you. Not allowing any assumptions or preconceived notions to prevent you from connecting with the flame. Not allowing your perception to be skewed at all, just focused on the flame. Looking at the color close to the wick versus the tip of the flame. Noticing how it moves and dances from side to side. Notice how large the flame is. And then certainly being aware that being able to just intelligently and consciously be present just in the moment, in this breath, looking at the flame and finding a space of peace and clarity. And realizing that the unknown is not a source of fear. It's a source of possibility. So that we begin to feel safe exploring the unknown without assumptions or preconceived notions. Just being aware that regardless of what might come up, we're prepared. We're capable. We're purposeful in our approach, mindful in our movements. And we're so confident in our ability to navigate the path ahead that all we need to prepare for is right now. As you stare at the flame, feel how confident you are in the distance you've chosen to sit away from the flame. You're not concerned about being burned. You're close enough that you can see the details. You found your sweet spot. And I believe that confidence is the cure for assumptions and preconceived notions. That as long as we feel confident in our ability right now, confident that we're prepared for whatever comes next, there's no reason to impose an assumption or an expectation or a preconceived notion because we're already prepared for what's happening now. That by objectively observing our own thoughts, having the ability to identify when assumptions and preconceived notions are undermining our ability to understand the entire landscape. So we're not just focused on what we see on the surface. We go deeper. We get comfortable in our vulnerability and confident in our ability. So we stand in this space with a knowing that our strength, our purpose, our confidence is all we need to navigate the path ahead. And then in all those moments when we explore and things don't work out quite the way we wanted them to, then it's not failure. It's just practice. And if we can approach the practice without any judgment or criticism or expectation, that we give ourselves a freedom to live life without assumption, without expectation. We just allow ourselves to be more deeply connected in the moments of now. Whenever it feels good, allow your eye gaze to drift away from your flame and just come back into the space of now. And just being clear that our confidence, our belief in ourselves, our ability to identify our gifts, to identify the areas of life where we show up in an exceptional way. And to feel confident in that confidence, that our ability to show up without a need to impose an expectation or an assumption actually gives us the freedom to be more present, more in tune in the moment. So my intention always is to give you mind shifting strategies that help to give you space to feel like your mind is a resource, that your mind is a laboratory that, has all of these tools and tips and tricks that are easily accessible. And maybe it's just allowing yourself that space of confidence and comfort in your vulnerability in this breath. And maybe it starts with delusional happiness. But I suggest that being able to create that space of confidence and security and stability now, it prepares you for anything that life throws your way. And to be able to be in a space in the absence of assumption, the absence of expectation, actually gives us a freedom to feel. And that freedom leaves us feeling internally empowered, inspired, knowing that the visualization and breathing exercises are probably all we need to shift our internal space so that we can show up in the external space as the best version of ourselves, so that we can communicate more effectively, freely, build stronger relationships with ourselves and others, and just not allowing the assumptions and expectations, the preconceived notions, the stereotypes that we might have about others to block us from a connection that might really be a significant source of growth and evolution in our own lives. And it's, being in that space, the difference between thinking of a space that we've always wanted to go because we have so much excitement about what we might find versus a place that you never want to go because you've heard so many horrible things that it blocks you from even wanting to ever visit in the first place. And just think about that as the opportunities of life, that approaching life with the idea that there's going to be something there of value versus approaching life with a feeling of dread, like it's someplace you never want to go. And the difference in how you feel while you're there. Well, and I'll suggest you've already arrived because the place is here and the time is now. So I always leave you with a homework assignment for the next week. And the homework assignment always starts with a breathing exercise. So the 4-4-4 breath, I always think is a really easy thing to come back to. It's easy to remember. So I'll invite you to start your day tomorrow with your 4-4-4 breath. 4 inhales, holding for 4 full, exhaling for 4, holding for 4 empty, and doing it 4 times. And then giving yourself a space where you are creating 2 preconceived notions that elevate you into greatness. So start by thinking, of all the things that you're able to do, how capable you are, how qualified you are, how prepared you are. Maybe even thinking how every person you meet is going to be loving, caring, compassionate. Approaching the day with assumptions and preconceived notions that are actually working for you, that are fueling you, feeding you. And then allowing yourself to create useful assumptions about yourself and your ability. So reminding yourself of all the things that you're able to do. Thinking of all the things that are in your control, which is your thoughts, your perception of the world, the approach with which you visualize the value you bring to people. So knowing that every smile, every encouraging word, every gesture of compassion and kindness is changing someone. So being able to show up and use that to positively impact the people that you touch. And just thinking about the power that we have to offer the best of ourselves to ourselves and ultimately to the world. And using assumptions and even expectations as a way to raise the bar, So think about the assumptions we have about ourselves, about our body, about our present, our past, our future, our dreams, our goals, and just allow those assumptions to be flipped so that they're not blocking us from the experience, but rather opening us up to actually engaging deeper and feeling a sense of clarity about the opportunities that are waiting for us in this life, in this breath.